Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another ICBA cast, live on Facebook and available soon as a podcast, wherever fine podcasts are sold for free. ICBA.ca, at ICBABC on Twitter, Facebook.com/the ICBA. I'm Jordan Bateman, the Director of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, joined as always by
Chris Gardner, President of ICBA.
For 42 years, ICBA has been the voice of BC's construction and responsible resource development industries and a relentless and passionate advocate for free enterprise. 250,000 people got up this morning, went to work in construction. That's 9% of the BC economy. It's a huge industry here in British Columbia. We talk BC politics and economic issues on this, our ICBA cast, always from a free enterprise, free market perspective. But first, we're going to talk about a quick event. Watch next week. We are going to announce it's a very special event that we are hosting we host every year called the Outlook Industry Outlook Forum. Easy for me to say. And but we have secured two guests, and we are happy to announce today who those two guests are.
Two special guests. The first guest,
yes.
Last year, well, some folks who attended last year, remember we had John King.
That's correct.
From CNN come in and talk about what was happening in the first 100 days of the President Donald Trump. There's been a lot of things happening in Washington since then, so we brought in another guest to provide a perspective, and that is Chris Wallace. Chris Wallace he is the only host in U.S. political affairs shows to host both Meet the Press and Fox News Sunday. He moderated the third presidential debate.
The good debate.
He was outstanding,
yeah.
And it was the best debate. And
it was the best debate.
Fortune called it. He stole the show, basically. Yeah. That's what Fortune said.
Yes, I believe he was leading in the polls after that.
Yes, it was good.
He should be president. Actually, the Washington Post, which, of course, no fan of Fox News, the Washington Post said that there's no doubt he's one of the best in the business.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I think you have to look at Chris Wallace. His father was the iconic Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes. Chris is definitely reviewed as one of the best. He's equally tough on the Democrats and the Republicans, giving them both a fair shake, but also being equally pointed in his questions and holding them to account. So he's going to be great.
And he's going to talk about, of course, U.S.-Canadian issues, the effect of trade, softwood lumber, all these different things that affect the BC economy from the southern flank.
That's
and right. Following him, we have our second special guest, the 14th Premier of the great province of Saskatchewan. Yes. There's two great premiers in Saskatchewan history, I think. Tommy Douglas, who was uber left, right. And this guy, Brad Wall.
It's going to be exciting. Brad is going to talk about, as Jordan just mentioned, putting the context of what's happening in Washington into a Canadian perspective, particularly that of Western Canada, and the challenges we're facing on the trade files, and also on the energy files. Our oil and gas sector is faced a number of hurdles. Getting to yes on these big projects has been very difficult. Some of that has been self-inflicted by governments who have been reluctant to get to yes and put up regulatory hurdles and other obstacles. And so Brad's going to talk about that. Really looking forward to seeing what he has to say.
He's not pulling any punches. He spoke recently, I think, in Ontario, was very blunt about the state of the Canadian economy. I believe this will be his first visit to BC since leaving the Premier's office. I'm really excited to meet Brad Wall because he's considered one of the great free enterprise leaders in recent Canadian memory.
Well, and he did something unusual for elected officials. He retired at his peak. The last election where he led the Saskatchewan Party to victory in 2016, he won 51 of 61 seats in the provincial legislature. Remarkable accomplishment. And then later he resigned.
And he took Saskatchewan from being a have-not province and retooled their energy strategies. Obviously potash took off. They have oil and gas near Weyburn. Weyburn, by the way, the hometown of Tommy Douglas. So there you go. Okay. He took it from a have-not to a have province. So lots of lessons that we can learn from Brad Wall. So watch for that next week. We'll have a more fancier special announcement where you can sign up, buy tickets, all that good stuff. But first, we want to talk about two major issues today in BC politics: LNG and the labor code. We're going to start with liquefied natural gas. Chris, yesterday the NDP government did what they decried while they were in opposition. They cut a deal with the LNG industry and said, here's what the fiscal framework is going to look like. And lo and behold, it's $6 billion less in taxes than the BC Liberals were planning or trying to extract from LNG. To give you guys kind of the background, Over 40 years, this deal, engineered by John Horgan, would see $22 billion of provincial government revenue. That's down from $28 billion under the BC Liberals plan. It would defer PST over 20 years. That means they build the project. Of course, there's billions and billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure that has to be built right off the cuff. That costs 7% to PST. They can defer that over 20 years, pay it back once revenue streams start coming in. Boy, I know a lot of businesses who would love that deal. Exemption from carbon tax increases. Hey, John, I wouldn't mind an exemption from a carbon tax increase, but okay. Elimination of the BC Liberal LNG income tax surcharge, which was something that the BC Liberals put in, the NDP are taking out. Cut rates from BC Hydro, but it's all predicated on a final investment decision. You have to have it by November this year.
Yeah, listen, this is a good news announcement for our fledgling LNG sector in Canada and British Columbia. The LNG Canada project is a world-class project. When it's complete, if they build it out to both phases, it would result in BC exporting and accounting for about 10% of the LNG market globally. It will put our industry on the map. It'll be the largest private sector investment ever in the history of British Columbia and Canada. It's a nation-building. It's a nation-building project. It's important for us to show that we can build major infrastructure projects, get to yes on these projects. The investments in technology, in training for Indigenous communities, for companies across this province and in other parts of the country will be tremendous. So this is a good news announcement. The LNG tax, particularly, I think, was something that presented an obstacle, and I think, frankly, I think the BC Liberals are wrong to go down the path of imposing a special tax for a new industry. I think our current tax regime taxes companies enough, and taxpayers will reap the benefits if LNG Canada can get to that final positive FID sometime later this year, and we put shovels in the ground. So great news all the way around. We need this project, and we need others like it to ensure that Canada remains a leader in providing energy. And one of the interesting things here, we've got a number of environmentalists who will decry this decision, say this is the worst thing we could ever do in terms of Canada meeting its GHG commitments that it signed on in Paris. But what you have to do is take a more global perspective. Exporting cleaner burning natural gas from BC to Asian countries that are relying right now using coal as a source of energy to be able to help them transition off of those dirtier burning fuels is going to be a tremendous opportunity for Canada to help reduce global GHG emissions.
It's funny. I listened to John Horgan's press conference yesterday, and he did tell a very compelling story at one point about being in China on that latest Asian mission. And he's standing on the banks of what the equivalent is of the Fraser River here, and he could not see the other side because of the smog. Yeah. And he said he had a real epiphany there that, if LNG can help clean up that air, even marginally, it's such a huge health benefit to those people. Right. It's better for the environment globally. And, it was a very compelling story, and one, frankly, that, Andrew Weaver should be embracing as a climate scientist. Like, who cares if Canada's Canada's greenhouse gas emissions go up slightly if you're cutting Chinese ones by far more? It's perplexing to me. The more I watch the environmental movement here in Canada, the more I realize it's not about greenhouse gas emissions. That's just their latest excuse. It's about keeping Canadian oil and gas in the ground. If they really cared about it, they would be all over this, supporting things like Site C, supporting things like this. To that point, we should also talk. There was a lot of talk among the media about how this signals another shift from Horgan's cabinet from being an activist government to being, a governing government. Right. We have to do the business of government was precisely Horgan's term. I suspect we would like them to continue that move, especially when it comes to Trans Mountain, where that seems to be the last bastion of activism and ideology in the NDP cabinet room, when all pragmatic reviews say this is the right thing.
Well, this is, put this announcement aside. Up until now, what we've had is this new government has increased and imposed an array of tax increases on businesses and taxpayers. There's a new payroll tax, which is going to hurt businesses. Personal income taxes have gone up. Gas taxes are going up in a few weeks. And they're reviewing a host of regulatory acts that will have significant implications in getting projects moving forward. So they're reviewing the Environmental Assessment Act, they're reviewing the Labor Code, they're reviewing WorkSafe BC. So a lot of reviews going on, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Which direction is the government going to head? And there is concern that this announcement aside, that the competitiveness of British Columbia compared to other provinces in Canada and other jurisdictions around the world has been slipping, and it will continue to slip because we've lost our focus on what it takes to attract investment, create jobs and opportunities, and that is having a tax regime that makes sense, having a regulatory framework that's not designed to get to know, but designed to ensure that proponents understand what the timelines are for certainty, that they're robust, that the review is independent and robust, and that once you go through that, on the other side, if you get approved, you can move forward with your project. We don't have that right now in Canada.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So let's talk about the political fallout. Andrew Weaver, of course, he controls 3 seats, the Green Party, which actually gives the NDP their governing majority. In January, not a long time ago, January 17th, 2018, he tweeted out this. I'm just going to do my Andrew Weaver impression. Lest there be any doubt, let me be perfectly clear. NDP government will fall in non-confidence if after all that has happened, it continues to pursue the LNG folly. So, saying that he'll pull the support from the government. Again, yesterday, someone tweeted, I can't help but think that after such major environmental sellouts, Weaver will have a much more difficult time continuing to support John Horgan, the NDP. Weaver tweets back, indeed, one cannot help but think that! Exclamation point. I find that a bit rich, as he likes to say. But he had a half-hour-long press conference yesterday. He was wandering around, winding about, and it was a mess. The media picked up that he did not have a coherent message. He keeps talking about how LNG is the end of BC's environment. It's a terrible thing, but he will not pull the support from the NDP over it.
Well, Andrew Weaver is clearly conflicted. Before he became an MLA, he supported Site C and felt that Site C was a clean energy project that was going to help our country and our province and be a source of clean energy for the next 100 years. He became elected and he completely reversed his position and said, okay, I don't support Site C. On this LNG project, as we just discussed, we've got someone who is against a project that is basically saying he's not concerned at all about the opportunity for Canada, for British Columbia's natural gas, to help Asian countries transition off fuels that
off of coal, dirty coal.
Coal, heavy oil. No, he doesn't want to do that. He wants to keep it in the ground. It doesn't make his positions on the environment don't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it's a mess. I, of course, get in my usual sassy comeback. There's a story making the rounds out of the Richard Zussman Rob Shaw book about how Sonia Furstenau sat in on negotiations during the minority government negotiations, sat in on negotiations with the Green Party with the BC Liberals, came out of that room and threw up in a garbage can because she was so sick to her stomach at the thought of supporting Christy Clark as Premier. So I tweeted out yesterday, first Site C, now LNG. I wonder how much Horgan has to do before making Sonia Furstenau sick to her stomach for making him Premier. That got a lot of cheeky responses on Twitter, so there you go. Let's just talk about political fallout quickly on this. There is a theory, and I think it's wrong. So this is why I bring it up. There is a theory that Horgan, who seems to be, has a small lead in the polls, has a decent approval rating, as most new premiers do, is still in that honeymoon phase. There is a theory that he can somehow engineer the defeat of his government over LNG and go to the polls and sweep in with a majority on issues like this. Here's my thought on that, Chris. I do not see, it's great he's done this for LNG. It'll be amazing if we get that final investment decision on LNG Canada, on wood fiber, on steelhead on the island. That would be fantastic for BC, fantastic for resource, fantastic for our construction guys. We want that desperately. I do not think anyone on election day whose number one issue is natural resource development is going to go to the polls and cast a vote for John Horgan over the BC Liberal Party. To me, it smacks of the time that Christy Clark cut a deal with the Building Trades Union on Site C, thinking that somehow she could bring the Building Trades Unions into the BC Liberal fold, and we all know what happened next election. They were more than happy to stick the knife in her. That, to me, is really what's happening here. I do not see this as some grand Horgan plan to seize a majority by crushing it. If anything, LNG opponents now can all coalesce around Andrew Weaver and the Green Party, which cuts into his left flank. Am I wrong on that? Or
well, first of all, obviously, the NDP government would like to be in a majority position. There's no question about that. But they've got some challenges. They've got a base that wants them to be more activist, and possibly more activist than they've been to date, because they still haven't come up to their first year in power. So there's still a lot to be done in terms of the agenda that they're rolling out. Second, they've got an environmental wing that will not be too happy with the decision on Site C and where they're heading on LNG Canada. But I think the reality is this. I think where the NDP are going to want to position themselves is a government that will govern in a common sense way, attract more support in some of the areas of the province where they were close to winning seats but didn't get over the line. So I think they're going to be very strategic in how they govern. I think they've tried to set a tone that says, hey, we're engaging, we're reaching out. It'll be interesting to see, but I also do not subscribe to the view that we're going to the polls anytime soon.
No.
I believe we're going right nearly to the end of the mandate. I think they're going to want to govern over a period of time and go to the polls and say to British Columbians, our government's worked for British Columbians across the province, and we want a majority.
Yeah, as bad as Weaver's political skills have been, and I think they've been quite exposed during these past several months, I do think he's correct in one diagnosis, which is this is a once-in-a-lifetime shot for the Greens. It's highly unlikely they'll ever hold the balance of power like this again, especially if Prop Rep fails. And so the last thing he wants to do is give up even a modicum of that.
Well, the challenge for Andrew Weaver is, what has he got?
Yeah,
and he's actually got nothing.
No,
he's got absolutely nothing out of supporting.
He's got a referendum coming this fall that we haven't seen the question on, that there's no time to educate the public about.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not sure Andrew Weaver is playing the cards he has as strategically as he could be, so I'm not sure where he thinks he's going to be at the end of all this.
Well, look, 1/3 of his caucus was physically ill at the thought of negotiating a deal with one side. That kind of tied his hands. Yeah. In fairness,
it's very hard for in British Columbia traditionally for third parties to make that breakthrough, and we end up in a three-party system. It's happened for periods of time, but then we revert back to a party that's basically center-right and a party that's basically center-left, and that's what British Columbians choose when they go to the polls. I think we'll revert back to that norm after the next election, and we saw it in the UK, where the Liberal Democrats were supporting the Conservatives.
Yeah. And Nick Clegg, wasn't it?
Yeah, and he was Deputy Prime Minister, and they were effectively wiped out when they went back to the polls. And Andrew Weaver's likely going to suffer that same fate.
Yeah, no, I agree. Which is why he will push this as long as he can.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about our Labour Code submission. So one of the 35 or so different reviews that the NDP government has initiated, and if you ever want to see a sad, overwhelmed man, come see Tim McEwen, our Vice President of Policy Development, who is responding to all of these 35 different reviews. He is constantly under the gun on another deadline from the NDP government, but doing tremendous work for us under that pressure. The Labour Code is being reviewed. And we put in a submission, ICBA, along with a dozen other large, significant industry organizations, including the BC Chamber of Commerce, Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, Restaurants Canada, the Manufacturers Exporters, CFIB, the small
UDI.
business folks, UDI, number of others, and sort of I forgot you, tourism in there as well. Cross industries, one submission saying, look, we represent probably well more than 1 million workers across this province. We need this kind of certainty. In that, we talked about a few things, and we'll go through the points sort of one by one. First of all, we talked about protecting the secret ballot and union votes. We'll come back to that in a second. Ensuring appointments to the Labour Relations Board reflect balance between union and employer representatives. Right now, there's more union folks on the Labour Relations Board than there are employers. We think it should be equal. That just seems like a fairness issue. And protecting the court-tested definition of essential services. The Teachers Federation does not want teachers listed as an essential service. Okay. This has gone through multiple BC Supreme Court decisions, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court of Canada has tested this. Essential services legislation works in this province. We don't want to monkey with that. But let's talk about our number one issue, which is protecting the secret ballot.
Yeah. So what we said in our submission to the review panel, that's taking a look at the Labour Code, is that effectively the Labour Code is working. It's provided certainty and stability. It's fair and it's balanced. And as a result, we've enjoyed about 2 decades of relative labor peace. I don't think, Jordan, anyone can remember the last major private sector work stoppage in this province. If you go back to the 70s and 80s, for those of you who may be listening or watching and are of that generation, there were often strikes that lasted 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months. It was a constant series of disruptions in the economy, which weren't good for our prosperity and job creation. So that's ended. So we're saying to the panel, the code's working and it's working well. Be very careful about tilting the balance one way or the other. In terms of the secret ballot, that is fundamental to our democracy. So the current code basically provides for a secret ballot vote when workers are going to decide whether or not to choose to join a union. And it is, remember this, it is the choice of the workers who are working in that company or on that job site to decide whether or not to join the union or not. Our view, and I think the view of the majority of British Columbians and Canadians, is that that choice should be expressed through a secret ballot. The secret ballot's open, it's transparent, there's integrity to that process. So both the union organizers and management understand after that vote, this is the true intention of these workers.
There was no shenanigans, there was no intimidation. They walked into a ballot, no one knows how they're going to vote, and they were able to cast that out.
And that should be preserved. If you strip that away from workers, if you're really stripping away a fundamental democratic right, if you strip that away, then what's left? What's left is called a card check system, where employees will just merely sign a card. The challenge with that system is that union organizers approach workers in coffee shops, on their doorstep, on the soccer field.
Supervisors sometimes.
They run around and they say, here, Ed or Mary, please sign the card. Everyone's signing the card. You've got to sign the card.
Why won't you sign the card?
There's a degree of peer pressure, and sometimes it goes beyond that to coercion. It's not healthy. It's not a healthy environment. Workers deserve the time to consider what the position of the union is and what the position of the company is, and then to go into a ballot box and in secret cast a ballot, make their choice. In
a process that is regulated by the Labour Relations Board, and it's a similar parallel. Just as Elections BC monitors our provincial elections, by-elections, so the LRB monitors this. We're not talking about long periods of time, 10-day campaign, quote-unquote, periods where both sides have legislative moments where they can give information, and there's very strict rules about what they can and cannot do. The system works. The unions hate it, though, because they can't use their muscle or that peer pressure in order to get it. And the Manning Center has done reports showing that between card check and secret ballot moments that support for unions plunge. Why? Because there is none of that coercion, intimidation, or peer pressure that goes on. This is a problem for the unions who are desperate to try to unionize as many things as possible.
And the reality about where we are now in terms of our workforce, technology is impacting workplaces in a very dramatic way. We've got younger people entering the workforce. They want more choice. They want more flexibility. They work differently. They view the world differently. And so we should be looking at ensuring that workplaces are looking to the future in terms of the issues that we're dealing with in productivity and opportunities to gain skills and develop your career. Not look to the past. Looking back to the 70s and 80s and trying to structure formalized relationships that really, that era is gone. It's over. And if you think of the percentage of the workforce in British Columbia that's unionized, it's an increasingly smaller percentage. Why is that? It's because workers don't see the need. And unions, frankly, are often more of a hindrance to companies growing and succeeding than a help. And so in the construction sector of our economy, about 40,000 men and women woke up today, went to work. Only about 13% of them are members of a traditional building trades union. There's about 10% that would be part of more progressive unions, such as CLAC, and then the rest are non-unionized or part of an employee association. And as a result, we've got a workforce that's flexible, that builds some of the best projects in North America, and they do it competitively, safely, and we need to continue with that framework. To upset the apple cart, it's going to cost jobs, going to cost taxpayers, and it's not going to be good for employer-employee relations.
No, I agree. We also need to protect the personal and private information of employees. Unions want to get a hold of email lists, addresses, contacts, other personal information of employees, even before they've unionized them. That can't be allowed. Companies aren't allowed to use that information for these kind of purposes, why should unions be?
Everyone's running around protecting their personal information.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to say, okay, well, a union's going to want to unionize, so therefore the company is obligated to give all the personal information of employees to those union organizers.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, preventing legislative sectoral bargaining. So what this is if this is the union's dream, because they want to force everyone to be in a union. So what this means is, I own a coffee shop. My workers decide to unionize. I cut a deal with them and say, okay, I'll pay you this much. I negotiate in good faith, and then that contract automatically applies to every other single coffee shop in the province of British Columbia. So Chris's coffee shop in Kitimat has to pay the same rates that I'm paying my guys in Chilliwack or wherever. So legislative sectoral bargaining, this is the thing that really killed Glenn Clark in the 90s when he tried to bring this in. He was forced to back down. Even the hint of this coming back again is terrible news for the NDP. And then finally, ending governments dictating employee choice on large construction projects through project labor agreements. And Chris, I know you've done a lot of work on PLAs, so why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, this is trying to put a square peg into a round hole. When there's a big industrial project, LNG Canada, for example, what the NDP would like is to create an entity, a contracting entity that every single employee who's working on that project has to join. And then in the past, what's happened is that they're paying into a pension plan that is set up by that entity. Yeah. And sometimes when the workers leave that job after a year or 2 or 5 years, depending how long the project is, those pension benefits are stranded. That's not good for the workers. It's also not good for the overall management of the project. Mm-hmm. Projects work best when the owner goes out and tenders the work in a fair and open bidding process, chooses the companies that can execute the work in the safest way possible, delivering best value with the capability and the skills to be able to do the work. That's how projects should be run. The private sector knows how to build projects, and they do it well. When government starts to overlay very strict contracting requirements, not helpful. Costs will go up. Schedules will be extended, mm-hmm. and ultimately taxpayers will foot the bill.
And remember, they're tilting the playing field to that 13% that are in the building trades unions that gave the NDP all this money in previous elections, all this manpower, all these candidates. Just imagine that if you could only go out and get bids from 13% of an industry, just how much the 13% are going to bid on projects. All right, well, that is it for us on another ICBA Cast. We survived another one, Chris.
We did.
Everyone is happy. Thank you for listening. We'll be back soon. Stay tuned throughout the week. As you've noticed the past couple of weeks, we've been doing more and more of these live videos, different conversations with folks as they come into our office. ICBA.ca, at ICBABC on Twitter, Facebook.com/the ICBA. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Have a good weekend.